Welcome everyone to another episode of Women in the Military. I'm really excited to have Brittinie here. I was on her show, and so I'm really excited because we both have a passion for sharing the stories of women who served in the military. And so it's really fun to get to do this cross collaboration. And I got to tell her my story, and now she gets to tell you yours. So I'll link to that episode in the show notes if you want to listen to more of my story, and so you can check out her podcast. So welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited that we get to cross collaborate. So that's what is so amazing about female veterans and service women. Like we just love to connect and stay together. It really is a sisterhood.
It really is, yeah. It's really exciting, and I really believe in a rising tide lifts all boats, so I'm, like, really happy to support you and to see someone else out there sharing the stories because there's so many stories of women, and I can't cover all of them, and so I'm really just excited to see another voice out there doing that work because it's so important.
Yes, girl, I agree with you. We got to do it together.
So, let's start with why did you decide to join the military?
Oh, goodness. So, probably a long-winded answer, but back when I was in middle school, I watched Disney like every other kid. And I don't know Hillary, if you don't know who Hillary Duff is, she played Lizzie McGuire or whatever. She came out with a movie on Disney called Cadet Kelly. And I watched that movie and I was like, I'm going into the military. And my uncle at the time, he was Army. And ironically, he called that night and this was obviously before cell phones. So, like a landline, I'm talking. And I'm like, I want to join the military. And my uncle was like, wait, are you being serious? And I'm like, yeah, like obviously I had a very delusion of like what it was, but I was like, "Yeah, I want to join the military." And I mean, I always had very deep, like patriotic, like very big patriotism. September 11th happened when I was in fifth grade. And, so that always, like, I remember that day like it was yesterday, even though it's been like 20 plus years. And then, like even with the national anthem, like even to this day, like I get teary-eyed, like I get the goosebumps on my skin. Like it's one of those things like I bleed red, white, and blue. And you know, and I think Cadet Kelly came out when I was like in sixth or seventh grade. So like all throughout high school, I was like, I'm gonna join the military. And then my dad also said, he was like, well, I'm not paying for your college. And so I knew that the military pays for your college. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just do, college. And I initially, because my uncle was in the army, I was going to join the army. And, you know, him, so he's the uncle, so he's the brother to my dad. So during the summer, we would sometimes travel together as like family and go to like amusement parks or whatever. So because he was in the military, we would stay on like housing, like the base, not base housing, but lodging. So we stayed at Air Force bases and we stayed at Army bases. And that was, I think, when I got the first glimpse of the difference between the Air Force and Army. And that was also the vacation that my uncle was like, I think I'd feel more comfortable with you joining the Air Force. And I was like, okay. So, because he deployed a lot and he was like, just being your uncle, I'd just feel more comfortable if you just join the Air Force. And again, that trip kind of opened my eyes to the quality of life, or the difference of quality of life between the Army and the Air Force. And I was like, okay, Air Force probably the better route. Nothing wrong with the Army. It was just, I mean, we all joke about it, right? Um, so I was like, okay, I'm going Air Force. And I still wanted to go to college, like a university. Like I had these big aspirations of being a lawyer. And then I was like, I'm going to join the Air Force Reserves. So I was trying to talk to an Air Force recruiter, and because I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and in Omaha, you have Offutt Air Force Base. So the reserve recruiter was there. So I went to the base. I was with my grandpa, and we were trying to get all set up so I could go to boot camp. Blah blah blah. Well, I never heard from him again. And I was like, so he like kind of like screwed me over, but like, God works in mysterious ways, or the universe, everything happens for a reason, whatever your mantra is. But like, I was like, okay. And I was like, well, what am I going to do now? And I took the ASVAB and I scored really high. So of course I'm getting the Navy and the Army and the Marines, and the Marines were trying to get me real like with the bonus. They were like, oh, you could get like a $30,000 signing bonus. And I was like, that's very tempting, being 18 years old. Um, but then, and I was so adamant about not going active duty. I was like, no, I'm going to school and I'm going to do Air Force Reserve. Like that's it. I'm very stubborn. And so, um, I was getting into a situation at home where I needed or I wanted to get out. So the Air Force active duty recruiter called me, and I remember I was like, I'm not signing. Like, this is and then something happened at home, and within 2 days, I walked into his office and I was like, all right. And I signed to go active duty. And I just remember my dad tells this story all the time. He was gonna yell at me about something, and I was like, "Oh, by the way, Dad, I'm leaving for boot camp in 6 months." And he was like, "Wait, what?" And so yeah, so in July of 20 or 2009 is when I shipped off to basic training and became active duty Air Force.
I like that story, and I like oh my gosh, so much older than you. Um, it's just a reminder that I'm getting older, but I really liked hearing, like, how, like, something that most people probably didn't think about, Disney movie would drive you to, like, think about joining the military, but I think that's why it's so important for the media to, like, highlight, especially women in the military, because then it can, like, have this light bulb moment where you're like, "Okay, I wanna do that," and so I think it's really important that the media, like, portray those stories and highlight those stories, especially for women, so
Mhm.
that's really cool. And yeah, and the fact that September 11th happened so young and how it impacted your journey to the military and then the Air Force and Army are very different, very different,
They are.
and it's interesting that it goes, like, through all of their DNA, even in, like, the lodging, you're like, "This is a lot nicer," and so that's kinda
Mhm.
interesting.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I'm very glad that my uncle convinced me to go Air Force. And I know we get called Chair Force and all that other stuff, but I do think Air Force was definitely the better branch for me.
Yeah. So you went to basic training. What was that experience like?
Well, it wasn't like the movie. So, like Cadet Kelly she was like all pink and glammed and all that other stuff. Not that I was that out of touch with it, but it definitely wasn't what I expected when I was in sixth grade. Um, but yeah, basic training, it was hot as hell. Like it was July in Texas and it was miserable. I was used to getting yelled at home, so the TIs didn't bother me. Like I just kept quiet, kept to myself. Um and yeah, honestly, basic training wasn't that bad. I think it was the first, they said that when you go to church the first time when you get to basic training, you're going to cry. And I don't know why, but it's true. Like I think it was I don't know if it's because you were in such a tense pressure environment that when you're like in church and they're singing and they're praising, it was just like almost like a release. But I did cry. I did cry the first time I went to church during basic training. But then you kind of get into a routine. Like the first couple of weeks, they're trying to break you down, right? And then it just gets repetitive towards the end, and attention to detail and PT and all that other stuff. And so it really wasn't too bad. It sucked being away from home and not being able I think it's different now because I think they have their cell phones. I didn't
But
have my
the
cell phone.
last episode, we were just talking about that because we were
Oh,
talking about, like, how in some ways it's good, but in other ways it's bad, and it's kind of like, it's nice that people can call home without having to use a payphone, but then having access to the internet and the world when you really should be, confined away from it, so, yeah, it's kind of an interesting topic.
yeah, I think, I mean, I feel like the conversations when you do have that payphone, experience, like, the conversations are a lot more meaningful and you're more excited and grateful. Um, I probably shouldn't say this, but I do think the B like, BMT or basic training now is a little too soft. I think we need to go back to, the ways of when you and I went through or because you went through was it ROTC or OTS?
ROTC.
Okay. So, I think back to when we were doing those kind of things, where it's a little bit more I heard that you can't even do push-ups for punishment anymore or something like that. I'm like, that's so dumb. Like, if we're the military, we're supposed to
Right.
be, kind of intimidating
It's
still.
kinda like they swung the pendulum too far in the other direction. They need to find
Yes.
when I went, there were, like, limits on how many push-ups they could make you do, but they could
Mm,
still and, like, as the training progressed, we had more and more, and so, like, the first week, it was like, "We can only do this amount," and the next week, it was
mm,
double. But, yeah, even ROTC is now, like, 14 days, and when I went, it was 28 days, and I'm like, "14 days is, like, nothing, like, what do you even do in the 2 weeks?"
mhm.
28 days is really short, but at least there's enough time for you to be homesick and, do all the different things, and so I'm like, "I don't even know what you do for it's just crazy.
Yeah, I think they need to kinda go back a little bit more to where, no internet, no anyway, that's just kinda how I feel, I feel like, it's just gotten a little too soft, if I understand being softer, not too soft, but
Yeah. Yeah, find that
anyway.
right balance.
Yeah, exactly, exactly, because now I've been noticing, a lot of people are coming out entitled, they're talking back to their leadership and their chain of command, and I'm like, "If I did that when I was an airman, no, I would get written up." I actually got written up one time for saying, my leadership sucked on Facebook. I didn't tag anyone, no one knew my leadership, but I got written up because of that, and it was very yeah. I promise I was a good airman. So, after basic training, yeah, it was a very proud moment. My uncle who was in the army, he came down and in his service dress and so that was kind of cool to have that moment with my uncle. My dad came down and my other uncle, my mom came down. So it was really nice to have that experience because I was the first, I guess, female in the family to join. My dad and my mom didn't join, so I was kind of just the outlier, I guess. And then I went to tech school in San Angelo, Texas. So I became an Intel analyst. Um, be yeah, I don't know why, to be honest with you. I think it was part of it was going back to September 11th, where I was like, I'm gonna kill these terrorists. Like this shit's not gonna happen again on my soil. And so I became an Intel analyst and I thought I was gonna go back home to Offutt. And I kind of low key wanted to, um, but I'm glad the Air Force did not send me there. So when you do your wish list, and this is something I didn't know, is you have your overseas options and then you have your stateside options. And for overseas, I was like, well, I'll go to Hawaii, because Hawaii and Alaska are considered overseas bases. And I was like, "Oh, Hawaii would be awesome to go to." And then I had a ton of stateside because again, my whole goal was to go to college. So I was like, I'm not going to be able to go to college if, I'm overseas. Well, they sent me to Ramstein, Germany. And I was like, okay, I didn't know how to accept it. And I told my mom and I probably shouldn't say it too loud, she's in the other room. She did not like that. So she was like, "You wanted to get away from here, and now you're moving halfway across the world." And she hung up on me and did not talk to me for like 2, 3 days. And I was like, being 18 years old, I was like, "I don't know what to do." Like, this is, like, I thought I was gonna go to Nebraska, but I'm not. I'm going to Germany. And I'm glad that I went overseas though. So, after tech school, my first duty station was Ramstein, and talk about a culture shock, right? Like, I've been out of the States once before, but, trying to learn the culture and, like, all the things that's going on with Germany, and being 18, I was able to drink on base and in the dorms. So, like, it was like a while. Like, I lived my party college days, quote, quote, like when I was an airman at Ramstein. And so I got there about April of 2010. And one of the things that airmen do when they first join is they go through first term airman's course, which is like a 2-week course on like what to expect and here are the resources and all this other stuff. And I walked in and I saw this boy and I was like, "Ooh, he's hot." And that was my husband. And we've been together ever since. So, I initiated that. So we both got to Germany around the same time. Fun fact, we actually went to basic and graduated the same day.
Wow.
And yeah, talk about like crazy events. So, I met my husband right away when I went to Germany. We dated. Um and yeah, so Germany was our first duty station together. He deployed to Afghanistan. I was always deployed at station because I was intel. Um, so one of the things what that we did while we were there is obviously partied a lot, but there was a situation where it was on March 2nd, so the anniversary is coming up, where in the dorms there was this guy and he was my friend. He lived down the hall from me. So I saw him every day, talked to him every day. And I remember I was at work and someone was saying like, "That looks like the Ramstein transport bus." And I was thinking to myself, I was like, "Well, that can't be Zach's." And Zach was one of the people who would go up from Ramstein to Frankfurt to pick up the people who were deploying, bring them back to Ramstein so they could forward deploy to the Middle East. And I was like, "Well, that can't be Zach's." And I just kind of brushed it off. And what happened was on March 2nd, this guy who worked at the Frankfurt airport saw a video that poorly portrayed the military against Islamic women and children, or women and men. I know it was women for sure. Um, and went onto the bus, shot my friend in the head, shot another person, and tried to take out the people who were going to be forward deployed to Afghanistan. So that I think was the moment in my career where I started thinking I started developing PTSD. Um, because as an intel analyst, like that was my job, was taking out terrorists to protect the people on the ground, right? Like the army, the Marines. I've worked with the Royal British Air Force. And so for that to hit home and to actually happen so close to home, it was it was devastating. And it still like even to this day still impacts me. Because I was like, it happened to my family. Like, I said before, like September 11th happened, and I was like, it's not gonna happen to, America again. And then it hit to someone I truly cared about. Like it was devastating. And then my husband, fiance at the time, got deployed to Afghanistan. And so that was rough because again, being intel, working on operations in Afghanistan, one time I went to work and it was a few days since I didn't talk to my fiance or husband at the time. I'll just say husband. Um, and I knew he was at this FOB, forward operating base. And in the intel brief, they said that 6 Americans died. And my heart dropped to my stomach. I was like, I haven't heard from him. He's at this fob. Like I couldn't stop shaking. I was like, I walked to my supervisor. I was like, I have to go to the gym. Like I just have to go to the gym. I like in that situation like that, that was technically classified information. The details were, classified information. So you couldn't talk to anyone besides the people who were like read in. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I need to go run or something. And that's what I did. I just went to the gym and I just got on that treadmill and I ran so fast. I probably would have got 100% on my PC test. Like that's how fast I was going. And I think that's like when fitness really became like a pivotal point in my career and my mental health because like after that I just felt like a sense of calmness and like obviously, I was still devastated, like, I was like, "I need to talk to him, like, I need to make sure he's okay," but
Right.
it was just like a sense of, "Okay, like, I could handle it now," and then,
Yeah.
luckily, I mean, it wasn't obviously it wasn't him, but, yeah, it was just like those little pivotal moments that, it really affected me, and, when I was still in, I would constantly have, like, these nightmares, where these terrorists were always chasing me, my brother, and my sister. It was so bizarre. It's always the same thing. And then how it would end is I would sacrifice myself to save my brother and my sister. And I would have these dreams all the time. And then like afterwards, after I got out of the military, I didn't have them as much. So I think being in that environment kind of like kept me
Mhm.
engaged, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I was
Well,
a go ahead.
I think that's interesting because I think a lot of times people have like a perception of like why people have, trauma and mental health and PTSD, and they don't think about like there's so many different things going on in people's lives, and especially like having someone deployed overseas and then learning like classified information about people who've died and not having contact with him. And so then you're like, kind of like, like everything, and then, and then having that situation happen where you're in a civilian place and you think everything's fine, and then a terrorist attack against the military where people die, someone that you knew close. I mean, I think it's really good to talk about how there's so many different layers and aspects to mental health that people sometimes don't think about, and so they're like, "Oh, well, you didn't deploy," or like when I got home from my deployment and I went to get help, the person was like, "Well, you're a woman." And I'm like, "So?" And
Yeah.
that really was like, so, like, having these biases about, like, well, you have to experience X, Y, and Z to have PTSD is really damaging to people because I think it puts a lot of, like, stress on people trying to get help because they feel ashamed that they haven't done X, Y, and Z, and then but then they're really struggling and they need help.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I agree. Like it's so taboo still to like even talk about. And being intel, like you had a top secret clearance, like you can't just go to mental health or seek help because then they're like, well, then you can't do your job. So that was where I was at. I was like, well, like I knew I was, like, struggling, but, like, I used the gym. I was always at the gym. So the gym was kinda like my escape, but, and for me, like, you're right, like, people are like, "Well, you need to experience X, Y, and Z." So I was like, "Well, I didn't experience that, so, you know, why doesn't someone who, I guess, quote, quote, "need more help" use those
right,
resources because I could handle myself, so to speak. And so I think that was like part of it because one time I did mention it on Facebook where, it's so taboo and people are scared to even seek help because of revoking their security clearance. And one guy I worked with at Ramstein, he was like, Yeah, I actually did try to seek help, and they said they weren't gonna revoke my security clearance, and they did. And because he couldn't do his job because he didn't have a security clearance, they ended up kicking him out of the military. So
Yeah.
it's we're making progress to being able to talk about it, but it is still very, very taboo.
Yeah. Well, and it's, like, counterproductive, I guess you would say, because if someone has a secret clearance and they need help and they know they need help, they can go to a counselor, get help, and then, be fully functioning the way they're supposed to be and get better. Instead, they're, like, in this place where they know they need help, but they wanna keep their job, so then they don't get help, and then it just gets worse, and then, that's not good. So it's kind of counterproductive for the military to be like, "No, you can't get help." It's like, everyone goes through struggles, and seeing
Mhm,
a counselor is not a bad thing in any situation. Like, you always can get help by talking to someone in
mhm.
a safe place, so, yeah.
I agree with
Yeah.
that. Mhm.
So, how long were you in Germany?
Yeah, so we were in Germany for about 4 years, and I was
Okay.
gonna get out. And then my husband, because he re-enlisted when he was in Afghanistan. So he had orders to why not, why not North Dakota? And I was like, what the hell? I looked at my options. I was like, okay, so if we went to why not? I was like, is there because I again I thought I was gonna be a lawyer. So I was like, is there a law school? No. Okay, is there any jobs? No. Like to go on the civilian side of Intel, and that was an option. And I looked at like USA jobs, and there was nothing for me. And I was like, Lord, please give me a sign. And I think not having anything going on at Minot gave me the sign, and he was like, well, no, you're gonna just reenlist. So that's what I did. I waited to the very last day that I could, and I reenlisted. And so I reenlisted. I was like, okay, frickin' government's gonna have me for another 4 years. And it did kind of help that I had a bonus at the time. So I was like, well, I mean, the money kind of helps too. Because we were at this point just newly married. And then, so one thing that a lot of people just assume is when you get married that you're going to get stationed together. So the Air Force, I can't speak on all the departments, but I know with the Air Force, they do try to keep you guys together. However, um, trying could also mean your bases are an hour apart. So our orders got changed and we ended up going to Vegas. And I got stationed at Creech Air Force Base and he got stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. Now, between the bases, it's about an hour. So we lived halfway. So it was 30 minutes to work for both of us. Um, and that was the Air Force's way of making sure that we were together. Um, it obviously wasn't bad, but a lot of people just assume that if they get married, they're just gonna automatically be at the same base, and that's not the case. So do not get married for the simple fact of getting stationed together. Little fact right there. So then I was at Creech Air Force Base for about 4 years. There was a lot of threats because a lot of people knew, a lot of terrorists knew that that's where a lot of the operations are. So, yeah, we couldn't. There was a time where it was very detailed, where the person wanted to attack military, and they were like, they take this road. This is where they meet. Because we do car rides and stuff like that, and then so we weren't able to even wear our uniform to and from base. Even though it was like it was literally one road going from North Las Vegas to Creech Air Force Base. Like the only thing in between where I lived and the base was a prison. And like that was it. Like there was nothing else. So if you're on that road, you're either going to the prison or you're going to the Air Force Base. Like there was nothing else. Um, so that kind of I was like, okay, I'm just done. Like I'm just tired of working shift work. I'm tired of working holidays. I just want to move on with my life. And then the shooting in Vegas happened. And and then because I would always brief, because I was the briefer, I would always brief. I was like, when you guys go out on the strip for New Year's, make sure you're being careful because, Vegas is a hot spot for a potential terrorist attack. And when the Vegas shooting happened, I was like, these fuckers did it. They finally did it. And to find out it wasn't a terrorist attack and the motive is still unknown, it was like, it's still upsetting, but my PTSD retriggered at that night. And I was like, again, it was so close to home. I was actually on my way to the strip to pick up someone from the airport when it happened. So like, and I was like, why are we in a standstill? Why are these cops like rushing past me? And so again, I think like when people talk about PTSD, it's not an everyday thing, right? Like you're not struggling. I mean, you may be, but in my case, you're not struggling every day, but there's going to be certain things even years after where certain things are going to re-trigger it. And that Vegas shooting was one of them. And I had a very, very hard time dealing with it cuz I was like, "Well, why didn't I stop and help?" And cuz I was like, I have the training, I have the tools. Like I should have done that. And so I think it was like a struggle for me on, like not helping. But after that, I was like, okay, I want to go to school. Um, Still trying to figure out my life. And my husband decided to commission, and I mean, I already knew that he was going to be a 20-year person, and I didn't think if if I had a Monday through Friday, I might have been a 20-year person. But I was like, no, I want to get out. I want to see, what are my other options. So in 2017, that seems so long ago. That's when I actually transitioned out, and I did the reserves for about 6 months, and then I just like kind of got out. I got pregnant, and we PCS'd, and it was just too much, and, like, the people who were handling my paperwork didn't know what they were doing, and it was just more of a hassle than it was worth, so then I was like, "Alright, I'm hanging up my combat boots," and that's how I got out.
So did you get to go back to school, or did becoming a mom kinda change everything?
Oh, so it's a combination of both, right? And I think, like, when a lot of people transition out, they don't know what they wanna do, or they lose that sense of identity. So I joined, like, right out of high school, so for 8 years, the military was my life, and like I got out and I was like, well, I don't know what to do with myself anymore. Like, I did go to UNLV for my MBA, and I graduated the end of 2017. So I was kind of like doing the reserves and school at the same time. Well, I was still actually active duty when I started, but
Mhm.
then I Palace Chase because I was like, I can't do this and go to school. And yeah, I graduated with the MBA. But then, I got pregnant with my first kid, kinda stayed home, tried to do, like, a fitness, online fitness thing, um, business, if you will. I mean, I do have the fitness business, but it was more of, like, kind of a hobby trying to figure out my life, when I
Right.
first started. And then, yeah, so being a mom kinda took over, and then, after a couple years, I was like, doing the fitness stuff and, health and nutrition and stuff like that. I was like noticing that with my clients, I was doing a lot of like rehab stuff. That they're like, oh, my shoulder hurts, my knee hurts. Like, what exercises, what stretches? And I was like, why am I not a physical therapist? And I was like, and I didn't realize how much they made. So I was like, why am I not doing this? And, so I applied to physical therapy school. I'm actually in physical therapy school now, because again, I still don't know what I'm doing with my life. And yeah, so right now I am currently a mom of 4 with 4 kids, 5 and under, going to school full time. I have my health and fitness online business, which is more kind of unfortunately on the back burner because of everything else going on, but I still do it. and then my Women Serve Two podcast. So all plates are rolling.
And you sleep when?
I try to nap when sometimes I get some sleep when I blink.
You're so funny. I really liked that you talked about how lost you felt because I feel like so many veterans get out and they have the same experience because I just did a thing on LinkedIn this morning and someone's like, "What question do you wish you would have asked yourself before you got out of the military?" And my question was, "Who am I? What do I want to do?" Because I didn't realize how much of my identity was tied into the military and how that was like directing my life forward. And then when it was gone, and I was like, what do I do now? Like,
Hmm.
what do I, and I was like, I didn't even know how to put into words what I wanted to do because I just had not relied on myself and had just relied on the military for so long. And especially I did a interview a long time ago about how like the last part of your brain forms between 18 and 23, the time you
Mm,
were in the military. And so your brain gets reliant on the military to make like these decisions for you because that's what you're doing at the
mm.
time. And so it's really, I think it's something we need to talk about more about how people need to be aware that when they leave the military, they're going to have all these questions and they're gonna wonder why no one told them, but at least people are talking about it now. But I still feel like it's like you can't really comprehend. It's like you don't know what you're missing until it's gone. It's like that
Yeah.
with the military.
Yeah, and honestly, like, even, like, the conversations I've been having on my podcast, like, so many women are feeling the same way. It's like, when you go through TAPS, the Transition Assistance Program, like, they literally just tell you how to build a resume, and that's
Yeah.
it. Like, they don't tell you, like, how you're gonna feel and, like, what you should be doing, and yeah, like, especially when you go from being a kid in high school with your parents, then you have like a new authority figure of Uncle Sam, and you have rules and structure and all this other stuff. And then you get out, and then you have no one to answer to. Like, you don't know, like, you officially have to almost be like a adult at that point, like finances and like trying to figure out where to live, what to do, prices of everything, because a lot of people don't realize like that housing allowance, that BAH, that BAS, that helps out a lot. And I mean, the economy is a little rough right now. And,
Mhm.
like, in student loans, I always tell people, I was like, honestly, the military has been so great because I've used my GI Bill. I have no student loans, and I have gotten an associate's, bachelor's, master's, and I'm working on my doctorate with either the TA, which tuition assistance in the military. So, advice, if you are in, take full advantage of that. You get 6 classes. If you go to AMU, I know it pays for the full 6 classes. Um, and use the tuition assistance. Do not tap into your GI Bill until you are out because you're going to be missing a lot of money. Um, because you can't double dip with the whole BAH. But yeah, honestly, use your benefits. Like, and that's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why, like, I really enjoy your book and the resource that you put in there. Yeah, I'm gonna pitch your book because, like, I wish I had that, even before I joined too, because I didn't know my options. I genuinely didn't even know what the reserves versus active duty, like the main difference between the reserves and active duty. And then I didn't know what ROTC was. Someone brought it up to me. They're like, "Well, why don't you do ROTC and go to college and then go to the military?" And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And then I mentioned it to my dad, and he's like, "Well, you're never gonna go in the military." And then I was like, "Okay, well, I'm clearly not doing that." So, like, I mean, the resources and the information that you have in your book could be so helpful for someone who like doesn't know what is out there for them. And so if you are thinking about joining, or even if you are in and you're brand new, or even if you're like a little bit more seasoned, I highly recommend getting Amanda's book, because there's just so much information and resources that you could use to fully use like the potential of your benefits.
Yeah, I mean, A Girl's Guide to Military Service, it was written for a younger me because I was a lot like you, where I was like, I didn't have like a military connection. I only learned about ROTC because my friend was like, "Why aren't you enlisting? Let's go to lunch. Let me tell you about ROTC, and then there's an open house, and you have to go before you enlist." And so he kind of like forced me to like redirect my path. And it was funny because I'm like, I don't even know why he was like so passionate, but probably because he's like, "What are you doing? You could do this." And so I'm really thankful for him for, redirecting my path and taking me to lunch at Taco Bell and changing my life. And that will stick with me forever. And so I tried to put as many resources I had learned, and then I did a lot more research because I only served in the Air Force. I deployed with the Army, so I kind of knew. But then, I've had to learn about the Navy and the Coast Guard, now the Space Force, and why am I free? Oh, in the Marine Corps. Sorry. Oh, I almost got in trouble. Forget the Marine Corps. But I learned so much about the military, and I just wanted people to have all the information in one place. And hearing that you were like, I didn't even know what the reserve was, I was like, yes, that chapter mattered because I wrote about what's active duty, what's the National Guard, and what's the reserve because that was something I didn't understand
Mhm,
either. And I didn't really know. And I was looking to join the National Guard, and I didn't know what I was even looking at. And so
mhm,
I think it's really important to have all that laid out. And then to like part of the reason I wanted to write it was so that when you transition, you're already thinking about that from when you're in. That's why, like you saying, if you're in the very beginning stages, I think it's still a good book because you can start thinking about like, how am I going to use my career, or
mhm.
can I start something on the side that I can use after the military? Because the military is more open to letting people do more than just serve in the military. So I think I'm really proud of it, and I'm really, like, so overjoyed to hear your positive feedback because I was
Yeah,
like,
honestly,
"Yay!"
like, seriously, like, I wish I had that. Like, granted, this was, like, 16 years ago for me, but, like, even still, like, I don't think a lot of people know, like, some of those major differences. And you're right, like, if everything's laid out for you, you can make a better, like, more informed decision. Because again, I didn't know what ROTC was. I didn't know what the difference, and especially the pay difference between enlisted and officer. And so when I joined and I got to my first duty station, I was like, well, I want to go back to ROTC. So they had and I was like, I want a commission because one, they're making a shit ton more money. And two, like I want to be a leader. Um, you can still be a leader in the enlisted force, but like
Yes.
you know what I mean. Um, and so, like, I tried to apply, and then because the enlisted has a couple like ROTC scholarships where they could get you out of your enlistment and then send you back to school and then commission that way. And so that's what I tried to do. I tried to apply, and I got shot down because my leadership said they thought I was too young or too inexperienced to do that. And so, like, that was kind of when they started shutting down my whole hopes and dreams, if you will. So, when you do join, or if you are thinking about joining, like, see the paths, like the different paths, the different options. Some people don't want to go officer, and that's totally fine. Um, just know the differences. Know if you want to do full time, guard for your state, or reserve, depending on what it is. But that's why I love your book. It's laid out so a lot more people could be informed.
Yeah, that's really the main point is to make sure people have all the information. Even like you said, I went Intel, I don't know why, and it's like, I didn't really think a lot about I ended up doing civil engineering as my degree, so, like, it kinda made sense, but then it was also, like, I could have done anything, and I kinda narrowed my focus and didn't even look at other career fields. I remember they'd have, like, a career day, and I'd be like, "Well, I'm gonna be an engineer, there's no point in talking to people," and it's like, "What were you thinking? Like, why not talk to people and figure out, like, what other opportunities there are in the military?" And so, I think just having, like, all those things and not just, like, the recruiter's like, "Well, you should do this," and you're like, "Okay, that's also what I was gonna do when I was enlisting." They're like, "You should do this." I was like,
Yeah.
"Okay, sounds good," and I didn't do any research or figure out what I want, so
Yeah, same. So research because there is a lot of opportunity in the military. You gotta just look, find it, and again, apply.
yeah. So, was there anything from your time in in the military, your transition, or about the work you're doing today that we didn't cover?
No, I feel like we covered a lot. Very long-winded answers, sorry.
No
But no,
worries.
like,
I do have one more
yeah,
question though.
yeah.
So, I always like to end the interview with what advice would you give to someone who's considering joining the military or a young woman who's considering?
Mm, I do it. I mean, you just we don't have enough. I I know we're getting more people, but I just say just do it. Like there's gonna be naysayers. People are gonna, you know, just there's gonna be nays, but I just say just do it. It was one of the best decisions of my life. It really was, despite the love-hate relationship that I had with the Air Force. Sometimes I do regret getting out. And sometimes I do think like when I get my physical therapy degree, like I'll come back as, finish up and get my pension. So I mean that still always crosses my mind. But one thing that I always tell people is, especially when you're younger and you're not like tied down or anything, is try to go overseas in an assignment. um, I was very narrow-minded and, I didn't I was like, "Well, I'm gonna go back home." And a lot of people join the military to leave their home. I just wanted the free education. But they sent me to Germany and it was the best thing to ever happen. Um, I'm 18 to 22 traveling so many countries in Europe. And how many people get a chance to do that on the government dime? And, if you get homesick or if you serve your years and you're like, I want to go back home, that's fine. But take advantage of what the military can give you. Take advantage of the benefits, especially that education. Take advantage of them sending you overseas to Europe or Asia or wherever. Take advantage of seeing the world because a lot of people live their lives not even leaving the country, let alone their state. And you have that opportunity. And if you want to come back 4 or 6 years later, fine, but take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I love hearing that. I always wanted to go overseas and we didn't get the chance to live overseas, but we gotten to travel a few times and I'm just like, this would be so amazing to live here. So, yeah, my husband is going to get out of the military in a few years and we're already planning a big like summer trip when he gets out because we're like, it'll be the perfect time to travel. And
Yeah.
so that's really exciting to think about all the different places you can see. So, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the work you're doing to share the stories of military women. It's so important, and I'm just glad we got to do this interview.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.